Welcome back, everyone, to the 19th CAS Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be looking at a pretty interesting situation developing with Rex Airlines in Australia.
Yeah.
Rex is a pretty big regional carrier down there, but they're facing some hard times right now.
They are indeed.
Even possibly going under. And because of that, the Australian government's stepping in and considering whether they should buy the airline if nobody else steps up.
Wow.
It's a controversial idea, to say the least, and it's really got people talking about the government's role in the airline industry.
Yeah, it really has.
So maybe we can start by talking about what exactly is going on with Rex.
Sure thing. So Rex is having trouble keeping some of their old planes in the air, specifically their Saab 340s and the GE engines they use.
Okay.
And what's really interesting here is that the U.S. military is actually driving some of these problems because they're buying up these same engines, which is creating a shortage.
Wow, I wouldn't have thought about that.
Yeah, it's a big issue for Rex because they can't get the parts they need to keep those planes flying.
That's really interesting. So it's not just about having old planes. It's a whole supply chain issue because of something happening on the other side of the world.
Exactly.
Okay, and so because of this, the Australian government's talking about nationalizing Rex, right?
That's right.
I'm sure that's not sitting well with everyone.
Oh, you're definitely right about that. The Regional Aviation Association of Australia, they're called RAAA for short, they're very much against the government taking over.
Interesting. What's their reasoning?
Well, they're worried that a government-owned airline would create an unfair advantage and basically stifle competition.
Oh, I see. So what are they suggesting instead? Are they saying just let Rex go bankrupt?
No, they're not saying that at all. They believe that their members, the other regional airlines already operating, can take over the routes that Rex is flying if they have to.
Okay, so they're basically saying they can handle it without the government stepping in.
That's their argument, yeah. They're calling for a level playing field so everyone has a fair chance.
Level playing field. What does that actually look like in this situation?
Basically, it means that no airline gets special treatment or subsidies. It would let the market decide which airlines are the most efficient and best at serving their customers.
So in theory, the best airlines would rise to the top.
That's the idea. And in the long run, they believe that would actually be better for passengers, too.
That makes sense. But what about all those remote communities that Rex serves? Would they be left without air service if those routes aren't profitable enough?
That's a good question, but the RAAA has some specific examples to address that.
Oh, okay.
Like Sharp Airlines, for instance. They're already competing with Rex on some routes and say they can easily expand their service.
Interesting.
And then there's Nexus Airlines. They operate these modern Dash 8 turboprops and claim they could take over Rex's routes in Western Australia without any problem.
And without raising prices.
That's what they're saying.
So it sounds like the RAA thinks the private sector can handle this without government help.
Yeah, they're pretty confident about that.
But the question is, will the government listen to them? So we've got Rex's struggles, the government's controversial proposal, and the RAAA pushing for a free market solution. This is shaping up to be a really interesting case.
It really is.
Before we hear the government side of things, though, I'm curious to learn more about these airlines that the ROA mentioned.
Yeah, me too.
It seems like they hold a pretty important piece of this puzzle.
Let's dig into that a bit more. Okay, so Sharp Airlines, they've been around for a while now.
Yeah.
And they've got a pretty modern fleet, mostly Fairchild Metroliners and Dash 8s.
Right.
They're mainly flying in Victoria, South Australia, and Tasmania.
Gotcha.
But they've come out and said publicly that they're ready and willing to expand and take over some of Rex's routes if they need to.
Okay, that makes sense.
They say they can do it because they've already got the planes, the experience, and a really good reputation for reliable service.
That's a good point. I guess they've got the infrastructure already in place.
Yeah, exactly.
But what about Western Australia?
Oh, yeah.
That's a huge area with some really remote communities.
Right.
Can Sharp Airlines handle that too?
Well, that's where Nexus Airlines comes in. They're a newer airline, but they've been making a name for themselves.
I've heard of them, I think.
They fly these brand new Dash 8400s, which are perfect for those longer regional routes.
Oh, yeah, those are nice planes.
Yeah, and they've said pretty confidently that they could take over all of Rex's routes in Western Australia, if it came to that.
So they're saying they could keep those communities connected.
Yep. And they even say they could do it without raising fares.
Really?
That's their claim anyway. They say they're just that much more efficient.
Wow, okay, so it seems like the RALA has some pretty solid options lined up if Rex does go under.
It does seem that way.
But then that makes me wonder, why is the government even considering getting involved?
Yeah, it's a good question.
It sounds like the private sector has this covered.
Well, it all comes down to politics.
Oh, okay.
You see, both of the major political parties in Australia know how important it is to keep those planes flying to remote communities.
Right, those communities rely on air service for pretty much everything.
Exactly. It's their lifeline for medical supplies, mail, getting to work, seeing family, all of that.
Yeah, it's a big deal.
So no politician wants to be the one who lets those communities down.
I see. It's a political hot potato.
Yeah, pretty much.
But wouldn't a government-run airline face the same problems as Rex, especially with those aging Saabs?
That's exactly what the RAAA is saying.
Makes sense.
They argue that the government wouldn't be as flexible or efficient as a private company.
And plus, the government could end up subsidizing the airline, which would give them an unfair advantage over their competitors.
Exactly.
So you've got the government trying to make sure those remote communities don't lose their air service.
Right.
But then you've got the REA saying that a government-run airline would be bad for competition.
Yep. It's a tough situation for sure.
It really is. So we've been talking a lot about what might happen if Rex goes under, but is there any chance they could find a buyer and avoid all of this?
Well, it's not impossible. I mean, Rex is in trouble, but there's still some hope.
So what are they doing?
The administrator in charge of Rex's insolvency is actually trying to sell the airline again.
Oh, really? A second attempt?
Yeah, they're hoping that someone will see the value in Rex's network and their brand recognition and be willing to invest.
Huh. Maybe someone like Nexus could buy them and merge the two airlines.
It's possible, but merging airlines is never easy.
Yeah, that's true.
You have to figure out how to combine all the different parts of the business, the planes, the staff, the routes.
And then there's the whole cultural aspect, too.
Exactly. It would be a huge undertaking.
So it sounds like Rex's future is still very uncertain.
Yeah, there are a lot of different ways this could play out.
And this whole situation is about more than just one airline, right?
Definitely.
It really raises some big questions about what the government should do when businesses are struggling.
Yeah, this is a debate that's happening all over the world right now.
It is. Should government step in and save companies? Or should they let the market run its course, even if that means some companies fail?
It's a really tough question.
It's a tough one for sure. I mean, on the one hand, governments have to think about jobs and making sure people have access to essential services, especially in those remote areas.
Right.
But on the other hand, if the government's always bailing out companies that aren't doing well,
Yeah.
doesn't that discourage other companies from trying to improve or innovate?
That's a real concern.
Because they know the government will just come and save them if they mess up.
It's a slippery slope for sure, and that's what makes the Rex situation so interesting.
Yeah.
Because it really highlights that dilemma.
If the government buys Rex, it could set a precedent for other industries to ask for bailouts too.
Exactly.
And that could have a big impact on the entire Australian economy.
It could make businesses less willing to invest and create a situation where everyone's relying on the government to solve their problems.
Right. But wouldn't letting a big airline like Rex just collapse also have a lot of negative effects?
Yeah, of course.
I mean, think about all the people who would lose their jobs and the disruption to travel.
Yeah, and all those remote communities that depend on Rex.
Exactly. So is there a risk that the RAA's approach of just letting the market sort it out would actually end up hurting people?
Well, that's a big part of the debate, isn't it?
It is.
The RAAA argues that in the long run, a market-driven approach would be better for everyone,
Okay.
even if it means some tough times in the short term.
How so?
Well, they say that competition forces airlines to be more innovative and efficient.
Which should lead to better service.
Exactly, and lower fares for passengers, too.
So it's about finding that balance
Yeah.
between making sure the airline industry stays healthy
Right.
and protecting the communities that depend on it.
That's the million-dollar question.
So what do you think? Is it better for the government to get involved or just let the market run its course?
That's what we want our listeners to think about.
Yeah, what do you think would be best for the Australian aviation industry in the long run?
And what about all those people in those remote communities that rely on these airlines so much?
It's a complicated issue with no easy answers.
That's for sure.
And the decision that's made will have big consequences for a lot of people.
Absolutely.
Well, we're definitely going to be keeping an eye on what happens with Rex.
Me too.
And we encourage all of you listening to do the same.
This whole situation could really change the landscape of Australian aviation.
It could indeed.
So thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the Rex Airlines situation.
Until next time.